Hi, and welcome to another iSusi chat, our regular Tuesday roundtable of all things search, social, and marketing. And today we're going to be discussing authorship, the birth, life, and death of authorship. I know it's been a heavily discussed topic this past few weeks, and it feels like to everybody it's maybe been discussed ad nauseum, but we have a lot of small businesses that are members of iSusi Research Engine, and we have also a lot of clients as part of our agency, and we've been fielding a lot of questions about it. So it's definitely a subject we want to talk about, and so who better to bring in to talk about it than Eric Enge from Stone Temple Consulting, and he is obviously an expert on this subject. And also joining us, our regular panelists, we have Ammon Johns, iSusi Search Marketing Consultant and resident expert on all things marketing. And we also have Doc Sheldon from Intrinsic Value SEO. So, gentlemen, it's been a pretty well-discussed topic this last few weeks. You have to excuse me, everybody, I'm fighting a bit of a flu, so I might cough here and there. But yeah, I wanted to kind of get this hangout together, not only because a lot of the questions that were coming in from small businesses, should we be, even doing anything now with authorship, and things like that. So I want to kind of divide this hangout, if we can, into, three segments, the birth, life, and death. Like, in terms of, like, the birth of it, what is it? And briefly we just talk about this, because a lot of people know, and maybe it's not that important anymore. But kind of going into agent rank, author rank, and the patent from 2007, and kind of going into that, and then talk about the 3 years while we had it, in Google Plus, and then talk about why it failed, and the different. Eric's just done a brilliant post this morning about the possibilities, and a study that they did at Stone Temple about adoption and things like that. But Eric, it's wonderful to have you on again, and obviously you're an expert on this subject. But just for our small business members of iSusi Research Engine and our clients, can you just kind of go into briefly about the history of it? Why Google even tried this experiment?
Sure, no, happy to do that. So back in 2011, Google announced that they were going to start supporting a type of markup called a rel author tag. And what this tag was going to be good for is was going to allow authors to create a deterministic association between themselves and the content that they published. And that was really the basics of what it was all about. It involved some tagging where they would have to, on their posts or on the website where they were posting, get the publisher to link to their Google Plus profile with a parameter rel equals author in the link, and then from their Google Plus profile link back to the site that they were publishing on. There were 3 different methods that they talked about for doing this. We don't really have to go into each of those, I suspect, but the reason why they offered so many different methods is there were a certain amount of complications in implementing it. But let's back up and talk a little bit about why they cared. Why did they want to try to figure out which author was publishing which piece of content? And why did they ask authors for help with that? Well, the reason why they care is the same reason why they care about all sorts of entities. They don't care just about authors. They care about places. They care about events and time. They care about other kinds of people, buildings, all kinds of things. And they want to be able to understand semantic relationships in a great deal of depth. And they want to be able to associate different kinds of value with those relationships. In the case of authors, what it comes down to is if you have an author who's a recognized industry expert in a particular vertical, and everybody's favorite example in our world is Danny Sullivan, in the world of search, is a recognized expert. Google would want to be able to recognize that and potentially do two things with that information. One is show their articles differently in the search results. And when that first came out, you get a pretty little picture of the author sitting there on the left side of the search results. And then a byline and a link actually to their Google Plus profile. That's how it first came out. But the first impact was it altered the presentation of the search results. And then the second impact, which everybody talked about but nobody ever proved really existed, was this notion that if somebody was an authoritative author, you could rank them higher and change their rankings of their content, not because of links and not because of other factors, but simply because, hey, it's Danny Sullivan writing the article. So that's a quick synopsis of the history right there.
Excuse me. So yeah. So obviously in terms of implementation, they had two options. They get the users to do it, or they try to do it automatically. They try to auto-identify authors. Taking a step back again, did some of this happen because of failed relationships with the Twitters and Facebook? They weren't able to get information from other networks, for whatever reason. They did try to have a relationship, I think, with Twitter at one stage. They would have been able to get some information from them about, authority, or at least on Twitter. But those relationships didn't pan out, so they felt that is that your feeling that that's how, why Google Plus even was born?
That's an interesting question. First of all, I'm not sure I see that much of a connection with the relationship with Twitter failing and all this. And certainly, I think Google Plus would have been born regardless.
Right.
Google just had to do something in the social space. I mean, you look at it, Twitter, even if they had an ongoing relationship there, Google would not want to be solely dependent on a third party for a rich source of data.
Right.
And I think that's sort of a limitation that they didn't want to accept. And for them to not have a play in social media, that would be very embarrassing to them, I think, at many levels. And they were embarrassingly late. In fact, Larry Page admitted it publicly that they missed the early boat on that. You look at Google, they're trying to dominate everything involving online. That's just the way they think.
To an extent, I think the very fact they had a different kind of social network did change their priority on it. I mean, they tried Orcup, and okay, we know that didn't really work, but it still gave them some interesting data to play with, and we know that. But they had YouTube, and YouTube, people really do miss the fact that it is a perfect hybrid between a content platform, a search engine, and of course a social network. There are huge social interactions going on there, and the followers, the subscribers, that kind of thing is all in there, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is, and it's funny. You just reminded me of a story I almost wrote one time, and I never did, which is a story of Google's amazing social media success, because nobody wants to say something like that. They own YouTube. And by the way, Google Plus has hundreds of millions of users between those two platforms. Oh, and by the way, they have the only credible free online video broadcasting platform in Hangouts on Air.
Yeah, that hardly establishes a failure, does it?
It doesn't seem like a failure to me. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, yeah, there are other things they might have, could have, and probably should have done, but not like they ignored it altogether, that's for sure.
I'd like to add something, too, to your response to Carlos. I think that there's another aspect to the authorship, in that using Twitter, for instance, or Facebook, you can go tweet, "Hey, I wrote this great post this morning with a link to it," and that really means nothing. Okay, I could claim to have written a white paper authored by the Secretary of State, but if I have access to my website to put my rel author and access to my Google Plus profile to put my rel me, now there's some level of verification there already. So that gives them the ability to get, to a great degree, verified ties between authors and content. Okay. Now they want to automate everything. They don't want to do anything with human hands and eyeballs if they can avoid it, because it just doesn't scale. So what better way to verify the algorithm's ability to accurately identify strings than to have a reasonably verified database being built by voluntary participation in authorship, just to the point where they can determine, okay, our algo's got it together. We're hitting a 99.1% accuracy, and that's good to go. And then authorship really isn't needed anymore. Now it's just eating up cycles, and cycles is currency.
Yeah, there's no question that cycles is currency. But the other thing that I'd add too is that I think that if you look at the kind of signals they can get from a social site like a Twitter, and I'm going to say things that I know a lot of people don't agree with, but they're lousy signals. I mean, I can tell you that I know a lot of people do this, and I'm far from alone, is I will look at a post from an Eamon Johns differently, and might just retweet it because I trust him and I know it's good stuff, and I never actually looked at the post. Right? Shocking concept. Yes,
That's
I know.
I'm unfollowing you.
Yeah. The next time I retweet something of yours, you just immediately unfollow me. That will work really well. But the thing is, and that's not even the worst case example of what happens on social media, right? Contrast that with knowing that somebody wrote an article on search engine land, and you can watch the actual engagement and user behavior with that article in a variety of ways. Even if they're not using analytics data, you can see, okay, people who click on that article and they go and they tend to spend on average more than 2 minutes on the article. That's an immediate thumbs up for that content, and that's a signal that's really hard to fake. And natural human behavior doesn't run afoul of using it in a meaningful way like it does on social media.
Yeah, social media can be gamed to an extent, whereas authorship is very, very difficult to really scale it to any sort of gaming.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what I think a lot of people miss, and has always been something that I've kind of giggled at, is during the time of authorship, the more we saw authorship being identified, the more we started seeing those link networks coming down. Mm-hmm. Because some of those idiots out there were stupid enough to be putting authorship on their link networks. And they were tagging, and this was the first time. Google can know that you often, tweet this person's stuff or do that person's stuff. But knowing whether that site is yours is always kind of difficult. It might be yours, it might be a friend's. Either way, you're going to tweet it more often than an average thing. Authorship let you do a lot of really, this one is mine. Ah, right, okay. Now we know. And that did reveal so many link networks, because once you know there's a bit of a rot there, you can more often spot the whole rotten fruit.
Right.
Yeah, it had a lot of trickle-down benefits to them, I'm sure, in detecting gaming and spam and networks, and establishing connections between authors and their content. The only reason that I can see them having done away with it is if they have something else they consider to be just as good or better.
Yeah, we'll come on to, I think we're all in agreement that the idea, the concept of trying to figure out, who's writing what and who's becoming an expert on a particular subject it was a goal. It was a great goal to try to implement. We'll come on to some of the reasons why it's it's either potentially failed or they've stopped trying to get people to help them do the tagging. Whether authorship, in quotes, has actually died or not, and that's why we kind of put the tag in at the end of the HOA is a totally different thing than them trying to get people to help them by doing the tagging.
Exactly.
Basically what Doc just said. They may have found another way to skin the cat. So
yeah, definitely. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. Before we go on to that, again, we talked about how it started in terms of the schema markup. They wanted people to put this rel equals author on the pages to kind of do this identification, tie in between them and the website. And I've heard a lot of people over time basically say the whole kind of addition of the author profile and the kind of the rich results coming into the SERPs was kind of Google's ploy, if you will, to try to push Google Plus more on people, because they were finding people saying, oh, it's another social network, why is Google doing this? And they were trying to get people to do that to try to push Google Plus in a way. Have you got any feelings on that, Eric?
I don't think Google Plus wasn't going to be made by a community of authors by itself, in my opinion. I mean, and that certainly wouldn't by itself define success for Google Plus. Could it?
I think the comment from Eric Eric Schmidt as well about potentially in the future we're going to be using it as ranking, and then people start seeing people's photographs, image profiles. There's a lot of people in the SEO community for sure were really okay. We'll get into this, even if they hadn't been thinking of Google Plus as a potential social playground for themselves.
Yeah, but of course, to set all this up, you didn't really need to do anything on Google Plus other than go in there and set up your profile and implement a link, right? And,
right.
Verify your profile, send a link to the site using the contributor toolbox within the Google Plus profile, and send a link back, and you're done. It didn't mean that you needed to start going and getting active in it.
Yep.
And they had other ways to make sure that everybody had a profile. I mean, if you logged into anything on Google, you had a Google Plus profile, right? So, all that, yeah, maybe, but I wouldn't see it as a major initiative for driving Google Plus adoption by itself.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think they may have seen that there could be some collateral benefit to G Plus by pushing adoption for authorship, but I doubt very seriously that was a serious motivation for it. It wasn't gonna give them the results that they might have been looking for G Plus.
I don't know. I think it probably was a part of the thinking, because we keep hearing there's hundreds of millions of people on G Plus, and yet when you're doing Hangouts, it's the same 400 people going to all of the Hangouts. There are 400 active users on G+. That's how it seems to me.
And Eric gets them all. Eric gets them all every week.
Go around the community, go around various things. You can come up with maybe 1,000 people who are actually using G+. You'll get more followers than that, but often they've just picked you off the SUL, the suggested user list, and then they're not doing anything else. Actually finding 1,000 active people on G+ is difficult. Go and try to do it, and try and find within a week 1,000 active people. It really is much more difficult than you think. So this idea of hundreds of millions, there's hundreds of millions of people who've registered, and why have most of those registered? For the authorship. So,
or just an email.
I think.
Yeah. Well, all right. Sorry. No, I can't let that one go. Hundreds of millions of people registered for authorship? Let's try that statement again.
Maybe tens of thousands.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You couldn't go on a tips post for even your home blog. Write about cats, you need authorship. Everyone was told they need to do it, and it's really simple. So do I think 100 million of those users may have been because of authorship? Yes, absolutely I do.
I don't think there are 100
I think
million
that's how
authors
many
on
of
the
them are
planet.
Indian and Filipino SEOs. You know.
Yeah, there's probably quite a few that have many thousands. I mean, so it's like any network. It does once somebody mentions some benefit of it, and you'll get that kind of the dregs kind of coming on and polluting it, basically polluting the network. But so we're all in agreement that it was a good goal to, it was a good experiment to try, right? It was a good vision, and whether they have kind of got another means to get the result is still something we can question. But let's talk about potentially why it's failed then, or why it's why we're in this situation now. So we've talked about computational resources cycles, and nothing that Google does is it's not just, and I've got a little bit of perspective on this of trying to build a search engine over or a search system and algorithms over the course of the last decade myself. People don't realize all what it goes into and the servers that you need, and you change a query to do some ranking, some different things in the ranking, and the resources go up, and it really is, as a small business trying to do it, it really became apparent to us how involved things are when you're trying to do algorithm type ranking. And then you multiply that by 10,000, a million times what Google's trying to do. They have bandwidth issues. They have computational kind of limitations on doing a lot of these processes. So we've got that as a potential factor. We've got staff resources, right? I know that you and Mark, as Eric, you did that great post last week, and I think it was entitled "The Experiment," right? And my issue with Google, more so than anything, is, I know that they like doing these experiments, right? They're a data company. They, everything's about data, and if you're into data, it's about testing. They want to make their search better, and you don't make it, you don't improve your search experience unless you test. But my issue is everything seems to be an experiment with Google, and if they'd have almost done it, I don't see Facebook coming out with their network and it being everybody thinking it's an experiment. I don't see Twitter, people go to Twitter or Instagram and it's not an experiment. So if they'd have kind of actually put more teeth into it, and it not, maybe the whole, my mindset of Google and this kind of experiment thing is because of how many products and good products they've let go in the past. And I just feel that they had maybe they've got a team of PhDs and so many people put in on this, and staff then get moved. So you've got resources, not only computational, but you've got staff resources and the actual commitment to it. We can come on to the markup and the adoption side of it in a minute. But what do you feel about in terms of primary reasons why it failed? Do you think that it was computation, server resources, and they weren't really seeing the benefits in terms of user experience, which is one of the things that they said. They weren't seeing benefits for the user compared to the resources. I think that was an actual part of their statement that they came out with from John Mueller. Or do you think that that they don't really give everything 110%, which is part of what I feel, when they're coming out with a new product, they don't really have a team dedicated to it, like the Facebook's guy. Amon's shaking his head. Do you want to jump in first, Amon?
Yeah. I don't think it's a failed experiment at all, and I know Doc has suspicions there as well. It gave them a training set to be able to program this algorithmically, which is always their preference. We know that the actual adoption of tagging was a tiny proportion. We know that a lot of the link networks show that they took a small section of proof and expanded it. We've seen this. There's not really much question there. But I think why it's been removed is, yeah, they've got their algorithms good enough now, and that's better. But I actually argue that authorship, despite what it was intended to do, goes against the very core of what Google's about. After all, Google's role is to present a list of search results ordered by relevance. Now, I'm going to put in pictures because I'm suggesting that my own list of relevance isn't good enough, and you now have to go through those and pick out your result. I'm telling you that my relevance as Google isn't actually very good, and that just a picture next to it is going to be better for you to pick. I'm telling you that your eyes are better than my algorithm. That's not good marketing for Google, is it?
Yeah, so I have.
If we have to look down that 10 and pick the one that's our friend, the only one we can trust, we're saying we don't trust the others. We're saying that 8 out of 10 results are rubbish. That's not good branding.
Well, let's be fair too, though, Eamon. Marketing hasn't always been Google's strong suit. Okay.
No, it hasn't. So the few things I want to comment on there. First of all, when Google rolls out something, Google has always done it the same way, which is somebody, John Mueller does a Google Plus post, or something goes on, Google blogspot.com or something along those lines, and then they're done. That's the rollout, okay? And then the market either adopts it or it doesn't. So there is no push behind these things. I think that Ammon's notion that it was a training system for an algorithm is a viable one, but I do want to offer another way to look at the equation as well, which is that if you look at a certain level of end user benefit, if they had seen enough end user benefit, they could have left it, but would have left it in my place, in my opinion. But let's talk about what the expenses were, and there were two expenses. One is the computational resources. Carlos, you're right that it's very finite what the resources they have, and too many people believe that they have these infinite resources. It's so far from the truth. I'll just give you another very simple example. If you go to Google image search right now, images.google.com, and you take a picture of the Taj Mahal from your computer and you drag it in the search box, it will recognize it as the Taj Mahal. So we know they have that technology, but they don't use it in general web search. And the reason why they don't use it in general web search is computational resources. They don't have enough of them. They have to budget this stuff very carefully. So I do think that's a factor. Then there's all these people out there running around saying they pulled it down because it was taking clicks away from AdWords. And it's like, good God, I mean, you think that didn't occur to them before they launched the program? Of course it did. These are the smartest people on the planet. They knew that it would have some impact on click-through rate before they pushed it live in 2011. It certainly didn't take them 3 years to figure it out. However,
the smartest people on the planet who invented ORCUP.
yeah, those same people, yes. But they don't have to be brilliant. That's social network now. We're not talking data science and search. Different topic, right? So, the point of all this is you can draw an equation and say the three elements in the equation: end user benefit, computational resources, and yes, impact on click-through rate. Not that there was some impact on the click-through rate with some stunning revelation for Google. It wasn't. But yes, those are the costs, right, versus the benefit. Wasn't enough there. And to Ammon's point, yep, maybe they got what they needed to train the algorithm.
Well, and plus to your point, Eric, I think that every time a new proposal is presented at the long green table in Mountain View and say, hey, we'd like to put an algorithm on board to accomplish X, one of the first questions that's going to be asked is, how is this going to affect search quality? How will this affect our users? Probably a secondary question is, how will this affect ad sales? So, yeah, you're right. They didn't get surprised by this. That was considered early on.
Yeah, no, totally. And the whole thing is, too, when you look at it a little bit deeper, we don't think of Google's market share as particularly fragile, but they have gotten to where they are by being very careful about that. So they do take the long view on a lot of things, and they're smart enough to do that. And so,
all right,
you know,
so we're all giving them a lot of credit here, and the brightest minds, and you know, they've got all these thousands of PhDs, and I get all that, but why can they not implement things or execute? You know, like you were just saying, Eric, about the rollout. It's like, you know, one person tweeting it here and mentioning it on his Google Plus profile, and we're all talking about John Mueller, and then, you know, Matt sneaks a little bit out, and it's like nothing seems to ever have teeth. And you know, I mean, just look at the mess of Google Business and Google Places. You know, we have clients that have got the wrong telephone number for you know, for years, and then correct it, and then it creeps back in, and you know, it's just such a, you know, so, you know, when I have a choice of who to get my cable done by, you know, am I going to get Google Fiber or Time Warner Cable? I want a company I can call up and who's got good customer service, who rolls things out correctly. I don't trust Google in terms. I mean, yes, they're a great company and they've done fantastic things, but it always seems to me that they're just experimenting with so many different things that they've lost focus on the things that actually matter.
yeah, no, it's a great question, and the reality is, you can argue about what kind of company Google is. Are they? First of all, we know they're not a search engine company, but that's off the table. They're a database company. You could argue that because they have the most successful and well, their distributed database technology, in my opinion, is the most stunning accomplishment, technologically speaking, in the history of mankind. And I actually make that statement dead seriously. All right, in terms of the scope of what they are, and maybe that's what they are. Maybe they're a database company. Maybe they're a server infrastructure company, but they're not a marketing company. They're just totally not a marketing company, and they don't actually know how to roll stuff out. The only thing they know how to do is to create great things, which if the market explodes around it, they can scale. And if the market doesn't explode around it, well, it didn't work out, and they, you know, so that's not great thing. Yeah, they're not going to change that. They're never going to become a marketing company. I just think
they could do a lot better job of actually improving the things that have, you know, kind of got them to where, you know, I mean, you know, there's home automation. They're going into so many different fields and cars and this and that.
Yeah,
and
but
I understand they're always. I know that's them. That is their, you know, that they pushing the envelope on so many different fronts, and I'm not questioning that. I'm just saying I wish that they'd, you know, they could perfect the local business system on Google if they just put some effort in, and it's such a mess for many clients, and it's one of the things that aggravates me the most.
I think, Carlos, that their attitude could probably be summed up as long as we make great products, all we have to do is let the results speak for themselves. We don't need to be marketers.
Yeah,
and,
build
and
it, and it will come.
And to a great degree, that's working for them.
Yeah.
It's not working for the little guy that got hammered in some algo update. I understand your point, and I hate to see that happen. But from their standpoint, the 0.05% of websites that got hammered unjustly are basically they're acceptable casualties.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, on that front, I mean, it's really, to them, it's about as long as overall search quality went up and there were no unacceptable fallouts, like the algorithm took Amazon out, you know, then it's a good rollout.
Yeah, and this is the company where, you know, we've been told there were over 900 different algorithm updates just in search last year. So the idea that they're taking their eye off of search is ludicrous, given that 3 different experiments going on per day, roughly over the course of a year. Right. Now, that's not somebody taking. The thing with Google, yeah, they focus in lots of different directions, but Google's huge these days. And this is a company that automates almost everything it can. This is a company where 5 people can do the work that 1,000 used to, because they're processing data and they're doing it algorithmically. Yeah, they've got their eye on a whole load of different prizes, and quite frankly, I think they've been very, very successful. I mean, they've cornered the robots market in a way that we're not even going to care about or notice for another 5 to 10 years. But once we do, we're going to find out Google owns that side of the future completely. They own something like 8 out of 10 of the world's best brains in robotics. Full stop. No two ways. They own that many companies. With AI, they lead the research in so many different ways. Yeah, you can get a company comes out of nowhere from 1 or 2 brilliant people. But that's the only thing they haven't got covered, and when that happens, they'll just buy that company. But this is it. They build in, they buy in, they build in new teams. You know, I don't think the emphasis is ever. I don't think they ever say to Matt, "Oh look, we've just invested in balloons. We want you to go and fly some." You know, he still works on search and conferences.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of them. I mean, the gentleman that was in kind of heading up Authorship got taken off and put, well, not taken off. He moved over to Android. The Android team, I don't know. I mean, I'll just disagree on this point, but I just don't think that they sometimes put the resources. I think that, you know, the improvements in search there has been improvements in search over over 8 years, 6 years, and they have done a lot, but I think they could have done a lot more personally. And, you know, I go back to other things as well. You know, the improvements in maps has been phenomenal. It's like, you know, if the improvements that we've seen in Google Maps could have been applied to things like Google Local and search over that same course of period, I think I would have a bit of a different opinion. Anyway, so we've talked about resources, computational and maybe staff or team resources being a problem, and, you know, I'm sure that you know, could have played a part. You know, we've all said with every kind of function that we're asking the algorithms to do or pull in things, there's computational restrictions there. One of the things that I think was probably the biggest factor is, you know, and this kind of goes against what you were saying, Amon, in terms of whether it's been a success or a failure, is my feeling that they were really at the mercy of user adoption, because I think AJ had said it on a Hangout last week that I saw. You know, if you're looking for an expert or a top, you know, a particular thing on robotics, and the leading expert in the USA or wherever in England on robotics had not done, you know, markup or hadn't done authorship, and their website articles did not come up, you know, there's a problem there. And that problem is all about user adoption. When they tried to automate the kind of connection, there was many instances where it didn't work out. So, you know, trying to get users to do something like that is obviously very difficult. And Amon?
Well, this is Google. You know, they know how long it takes webmasters to adjust to things. They know that people are still putting in keywords meta tags. They know that people are still sometimes using that old search BC one of revisit after, you know, which hasn't worked in anybody's living memory. It was one search engine ever used the revisit after meta tag, and it got incorporated into some SEO templates and shared out. And, you know, you're not going to say to Google, oh, by the way, some people won't adopt this and won't adapt very well, and it's going to surprise them. You know, they know better than we do. They see more of the dark web than we do, because we tend to only see things that we find in search or that we find through our friends, because they're having to explore the web constantly. I don't think it was any shock to them that less than 1% of people added the markup. I don't think that was ever a shock. I think they knew from the start that that was likely.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. I think that you know, all of us here have said on occasion, we live in a bubble. We tend to see things from our perspective, and Google also lives in a bubble, but it is a hell of a lot bigger bubble than ours. Okay, so they've got a much better perspective than we do of what the probabilities are of adoption, of abuse, you know, of basically any aspect you might consider. They're going to have a better idea of what to expect than we can.
And for me, the experiment wasn't about whether we added authorship. It was about whether authorship was going to add any value to the end user. And here's the big problem with authorship. And this is the one that most people aren't going to want to talk about. Has anyone ever read Catch-22?
Oh, yeah.
It's a great book. It was his first real hit. The follow-up book was awful. So, his value as an author wasn't there when he wrote that great book. By the time it was, it led you to his second book. It brought up a pretty naff book that would have been rewarded. Now, how do we determine what is an important author? Because most of the time, the really important authors come out of nowhere. It's somebody new, and they do something that absolutely... Malcolm Gladwell certainly did that. You know, you look at Tipping Point. Who knew him as an author before that? Not very many. Tipping Point comes along. Wow, everyone knows Malcolm Gladwell. How about Purple Cow and Seth Godin? What did he do before that? And yet, to me, Purple Cow is probably still my absolute favourite Seth Godin book. It's the one that absolutely defines what's great about him. So authorship doesn't help you identify the authors of particular good works until after they've done them. It does nothing to predict them. What it tends to do is reinforce that thing of somebody being able to rest on their laurels, and they had one success and now everything else will be raised up artificially more than it deserves because of that success. Now, PageRank already does that because of the popularity thing, so adding in something else that adds on to that is going to really push that out of proportion. And I think you've then also got the thing of popularity versus authority. A lot of top scientists don't have that many followers. Paris Hilton does. Does that make her a great author?
Of course it does. Don't you want to see as many pictures of her? Oh, sorry, that's a different conversation. But yeah, so the thing there is that, you know, the right way to use a signal like that is not to assume because someone published one hit that everything they write is good. The right way to use it is, okay, maybe his second book gets pushed live and it is a crappy book, but then you use other signals to rapidly adjust what you do with that. That's what I think the right thing to do with that. But I think it's still a valid point. But I want to bring up another one, which is that, yes, the adoption was in fact miserable, but let's talk about why the adoption was miserable. And the reason why adoption was miserable is because two different people had to take an action. The publisher of the website had to link to someone else's Google Plus profile, the author, and then the author had to link back. And that might not sound enormously complex, but just look at regular schema in comparison. Everything that happens in regular schema, it's just here on this one web page. Let's say I'm trying to tell people that this is a recipe. Everything I have to do is just on that one web page, and I'm done. Doesn't require two different people handshaking with each other and managing to cooperate somehow. And you know, the data from the study that we published today showed that of 520 different authors we looked at on prominent websites, more than 70% of them made no attempt to implement authorship. And these are on top-tier websites. And of the 150 websites that we looked at in this study, you know, the adoption rate in terms of attempting to implement authorship is not everything that you would hope it would be. Hang on, I'm just going to remind myself of, yeah, I mean, 28% of those sites did nothing. 6% had a completely malformed implementation that was not recognizable, and of the remaining 66%, let's see, 72% of those had errors in the way they did the markup. So it's just like abysmal in terms of what people did, and you know, and now we need both of these to agree somehow.
That goes back to the rollout, the methods of rolling stuff out. And,
it does, sure.
Yeah.
You know, you could imagine I'm going to exaggerate, but you know, a global tour. Okay, they're not going to do that for something like this, but how about a PR campaign pushing out data, maybe offering assistance to major, you know, the top 100 sites, media sites on the planet, so they could get it right. I can tell you something which I haven't revealed before, but Search Engine Land and Search Engine Watch had it wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this is another factor that shouldn't be overlooked as to why it was so hard, and that is that publishing systems didn't make this easy either. The different content management systems made it very clumsy to implement what, in principle, was a simple-looking tagging system.
Yeah.
You know.
They could have made it easy. I mean, whether it was, they could have done. I think the whole verification, the small take-up is. I mean, I think that's probably where I disagree a little bit with Amon. Is because again, I think you're thinking that they've moved on to something, Amon, right? They've found a different way to skin the cat, and they've used it. They've taken note of that data, and then.
I think that they were working on something else first. I think Google always looks at automation first. Then it looks at the fact it doesn't have a good enough data set to do it as well as it should. And then it looks to outsource people marking up data to give it, better data to work with, to train those algorithms. That's the way that machine learning works.
Agreed.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very interesting thought process and will be part of the mix here. First of all, no debate that they were looking at automation. There was a patent that Bill Slosky revealed to us all that came out literally 5 days after they announced authorship was over. And this patent talked about how Google could combine the notion of somebody having a certain amount of authority on a topic and a connection with you, and use that to impact ranking of that result for you, which kind of describes the basic personalization concept, but combines it with the notion of authority. So
which
that was particular.
Which is the thing that authorship does work on, is personalized. It doesn't matter whether this person is the accepted expert. If I can't stand them and I don't want to see any results by them, then serving me those results is bad. Whereas the second best in the world is the one that I really like, and I'm going to click through. That's the right result to give me. For Google, that should be looking at my tastes, looking at my circles, my connection, to determine which of the experts, because there's never just one. They've all had a mentor. They're all mentoring others. You may only see one person who's a clear leader in this thing, but there's always a whole group. Being able to define that group and find the one that's going to be right for you on your known tastes, that's also where Google wants to go.
But to your point of earlier, Eamon, I actually want to draw out one other stat from the research we did. Of the 28 sites that we looked at, or 28% of the sites that we looked at, so it was 42 sites that we looked at, that had no authorship markup attempt whatsoever. No author tag, no me tag of any kind, no links to Google Plus profiles. Google still extracted 7 of those and gave authorship markup to those posts, which was fascinating because they were so not in the game and they got it anyway. So that's pretty interesting. So clearly they're working at it at some level.
I'd been seeing that when authorship first came in. Even when it first came in, I looked at a lot of examples to see who was doing it, and it threw me at first because some of the ones I saw, I looked through the SERPs. There's somebody who's got it. Okay, let's look at their code. It wasn't there. There wasn't anything, and I thought, that's weird. Maybe I'm looking at an old version. Maybe they're cloaking. These are things that an SEO does think about.
Yeah.
And no, the simplest explanation was probably the most accurate, that Google was figuring it out on its own, but it couldn't do it for everybody. It tended to be the high-profile, high-traffic sites, the really obvious experts, the kind of people that Google engineers would have been able to spot very easily and tag as a seed set. And with that as a seed set, you then need the training set as well, and that's why I always thought that part of this was to train it. It's what I've said about schema all along in all of these shows. It's great if you want to use schema, but what you are part of is training the algorithms for all of those people who didn't implement schema. They're all going to get the benefit.
Yep, totally. So I want to make sure we do get to talk about where this is going, because unfortunately I don't have a long window to hang on late on the show. Do you want us to take this?
Yeah,
that
definitely.
on?
I was going to bring that up. I mean, whether we talk a little bit about, what now, kind of on to Amon's point, should small businesses even be bothered about, some of these things that do come out in the future, if we're all part of a big training experiment, but maybe we want to talk about, new developments as well in the closing few minutes. Knowledge graph, the knowledge vault and entity detection are going to be coming, big parts in terms of improvement. But yeah, where is this all heading, Eric? In a nutshell.
So, well, authority still matters. It's a big deal. It doesn't matter how they detect it, whether you manually help them detect it or whether they detect it themselves. It's a big deal. You as an author, you are an entity, which is a lot better than being a non-entity, trust me. You do want people to recognize, Google to be able to recognize that you push good stuff out there. So yes, it still matters that you publish really good stuff. It still matters that people engage in it. It still matters that your identity is clear. No way should you take those things off the table. Now, Google has declared that they don't use the rel author tag. That's fine, but you still want your byline name on there. I wouldn't rush to rip rel author tags off of stuff that has it. I don't know that I would rush to go throw it on a new site that I start with it, but getting clear identification of the content you're publishing, monitoring how people respond to it, tuning what you're doing so that response level goes up over time. Oh, and yes, I would still link to sites you publish on from your Google Plus profile.
Yeah, that's all really important stuff. So, I mean, like, just to recap, so are we saying that, in terms of ranking, because these are the questions we always used to field all the time, if, putting authorship on, and getting that connection there, did it ever have any effect on ranking? And if somebody then goes and pulls it off now, so basically what you're saying is, Eric, there should be no real rush. If you've already got it on your website, leave it on there. Don't be rushing to go and take it off. But if you're about to launch a new website, it's something that you shouldn't really. I mean, even though it's only a 2-second process to do it right, if you've not got the knowledge to do it right, you shouldn't really.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it that much. I think a clear byline on your article and a clear Google Plus link to your post will take care of everything for you, in my opinion. I mean, sure, if you can implement it, that's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that.
It's one of those things that, I think schema, if you have an advantage in people being able to, chop up, understand your content, serve it in other ways and other places, great, go for that, definitely do it. Make sure that you're clearly putting branding in your titles and things like that, so that if they're using snippets, there's a good chance your brand is mentioned there. Don't just have a macaroni cheese recipe, have a your brand macaroni cheese recipe, that kind of thing. Sure. So at least you're getting something when Google just steals that and sticks it in their pages. But that's really what schema's good for at the moment. It's a syndication. It's an RSS feed without the links to you.
And don't forget your rel publisher tags. You still want to use those. You still want to create that association.
Yes, I think it can, unless you're a link network. All of these things.
Okay, I'm not addressing my comments at link networks. That might be your territory, but
I address my comments to everybody. There's people doing all kinds of things out there.
Yeah, there you go.
Be mindful. Always think, is there an advantage in this for me? And if there isn't, don't do it. And the big cost that people tend to forget is we do know that speed is a ranking factor. The speed of your page is a ranking factor. Every bit of code that you add that doesn't add anything to the user is a cost. It's slowing down your page. So be very careful about adding in lots of markup that does nothing. I've often said the best thing to do with even a keywords meta tag, it does no harm. Yes, it does. It slows your page. It does you no good unless you're using it in a way that does, i.e. you've got greedy SEO competitors who are regularly checking out other sites. put in all the rubbish keywords in there that you wasted time on so that they'll waste their time on them. That's the only possible use of a keywords meta tag. And schema, the same thing. If you have an advantage to using it that offsets what it's adding to your page overhead, great, use it. If you don't put it in just on the off chance, because definitely speed is a ranking factor. You know that there's a benefit there.
But I think that your schema is much more likely to add a significant load speed burden than a rel me. But yeah, schema can definitely, especially if you get carried away and you try to do everything that you can possibly give schema markup to on a page, and probably only 2 or 3% of it has any potential benefit for you, then you're chasing the wrong cat.
Yeah, it's like many years ago when I wrote my last article about keyword meta tags, and I actually implemented keyword meta tags in that article. And if you look up, the tags are keywords, comma, meta tags, comma, do, comma, not, comma, matter. That's the last article I put meta tags in, for keywords meta tags in. So,
well, just to wrap up, I just want to thank you, Eric, for coming on today again and discussing. I know we've discussed it, but hopefully we've covered a few things that other people hadn't. And it's going to evolve. This, it's not the end of it. It's like it's just changed, and we have to realize that Google does these things all the time, and that they're trying to improve their search results, and they're trying to do that because their product is for the users. It isn't for webmasters. It's not for websites, as they said the other day. It's for users, to make that user search experience better, whether we like it or not. And they're learning and trying to learn to make it better. And so thanks so much, Eric, for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Amon, as always. Doc, thank you. And then next week we have John Henshaw from Raven Tools. We're going to be taking a deep dive and a look inside Raven Tools, and they've got some new stuff coming out, so that'd be interesting. So please join us again next week, next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for that. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, thanks.
Carlos, thanks for having us.
Thank you.